Great. Good evening, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Clarice Rosas-Sharif, and I'm the Senior Director of Literary Programs at PEN America. And it's our honor tonight to host such a special event and celebration of When They Call You a Terrorist, the Young Adult Edition by Patrisse Cullors. Look out for the pub date on September 29th and grab a copy. You can order a copy of the book tonight. You'll see a link in your chat. So let's support Patrisse and buy away. We are thankful to St. Martin's Press and the Strand Bookstore for making this event possible. Special thanks to Summit, our co-presenter for tonight's event. And it is particularly fitting as a partnership because Summit and PEN America share a common goal and mission to connect and foster a global community. At PEN America, we champion the freedom to write here and in the United States and abroad. And we stand at the intersection of literature and human rights. And we have actually the perfect panel of guests to help us understand vital issues that we are contending right now. Social justice movement building, resistance, protest, human rights. And so I'm really, really honored to be able to sit, once I'm done with this introduction, sit in the audience and listen and learn along you audience members. Tonight, we will have also a Q&A, so please use the chat function to surface your questions. And let me just introduce our guest quickly, and then we will get started. So we are really lucky to have Patrisse Cullors, artist, organizer, and freedom fighter from Los Angeles, California. She's the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Global Network and founder of the Los Angeles-based grassroots organization, Dignity and Power Now. And of course, she's the author of the memoir, When They Call You a Terrorist, and now it exists as a young adult edition. Joining her is Joshua Wong, Hong Kong pro-democracy activist, one of the leaders of the 2014 Occupy movement, an author of Unfree Speech, The Threat to Global Democracy and Why We Must Act Now. And we are very lucky to have with us Baratunde Thurston, who will be able to moderate the conversation. I'll introduce him briefly, and then he'll take it away. So Baratunde Thurston is a writer, activist, comedian, and an Emmy-nominated host. He's the author of a New York Times bestseller, How to Be Black. He's the executive producer and host of 2 podcasts, How to Citizen with Baratunde, and We're Having a Moment. He's also the creator and host of a weekly pandemic show, Live on Lockdown. Over to you, Baratunde. Thank you so much all for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Clarice. Thank you, PEN. Thank you, Summit. Thank you, Zoom, for keeping us all together during this weird time. You're doing a lot of work, Zoom. I don't know how you're doing it. If I start thinking about it, I get suspicious, but thank you, Zoom. And it is, you're going to hear the word honor a lot tonight, but I'm honored to be here with Patrisse, with Joshua. I look at the work that both of you are doing. I'll address you directly as people. And I see one of you on the east side of the Pacific and one of you on the west side of the Pacific, both doing this beautiful work of fighting for freedom. What I'd love to open with is your own description and definition of what you're actually fighting for. Patrisse, why don't you put into your words, what are you fighting for?
Thank you, Baratunde, and thank you, PEN America, and thank you, Summit, for bringing this team together. Joshua, I've been following you and your work for quite some time, and I'm always grateful when, especially here inside the US, we can have a conversation about protest movements across the globe. I think it's really important that we don't allow for US tribalism and nationalism to dictate how we have a conversation about who's protesting and who's fighting for their lives. So just very, very grateful for this opportunity to talk. And, you know, I think this question about freedom, I've thought about this question a lot. actually spent an entire year or two in a deep dive with Harriet Tubman. And in that deep dive with Harriet Tubman, it was about 2 years before we started Black Lives Matter. I was really obsessed with the Underground Railroad. I was obsessed with like, how did our folks construct not just a physical Underground Railroad, but a spiritual, a mental, and emotional Underground Railroad to push themselves to get to freedom. And what did freedom actually look like when they got there? Were they actually free? And we know now that you can't be free in this country, in the US, when white supremacy exists. You can't be free when patriarchy and sexism exist. And so part of what freedom looks like is the push and challenge against white supremacy and patriarchy, and the push and challenge against a police and prison state. And so I'm an abolitionist. And at the end of the day, freedom looks like a world without cages, and a world without prisons, and a world without police, and a world without courts and surveillance. And sometimes I give myself the permission to, really sit and dream about what that world would look like, and what it would smell and feel like and sound like. But I know that what we're living in right now is only possible because Black people are unfree. We don't have freedom because other groups of people are able to be free. And so I think the world of freedom that I'm interested in is a world of freedom that is truly based on the freedom of every single human being. Every single human being must be free. And that's what freedom looks like to me.
Joshua, I have a very similar question for you. What are you fighting for? And what does freedom look like?
Good evening, everyone. Greetings from Hong Kong, especially now is morning of Hong Kong time. And I'd like to thank PEN America for having me today. And it's a great pleasure to exchange some of my insights of civil rights movement in America and in Hong Kong, especially as the one who start to engage in street protests at the age of 14 till now 23. And I should start by congratulate Patrisse, along with founder of Black Lives Matter, named Time 100, for the bravery and persistence in standing up against injustice. And before sharing some of my idea of what I'm fighting for, I also would like to emphasize that I feel much sympathetic reading the title of the book when they call you a terrorist. Why I would say that? Because it seems inevitable that whenever the oppressed stand up against injustice, state violence, or police brutality, those in power would frame them as enemies of the nation. And a case in point, very often of the movement in Hong Kong is often criticized by pro-China media as controlled by the US. And I'm dismissed as agent of the Western CIA. Chinese state media call me as separatists and traitors. Either way, the speed of fake news spreading everywhere is unbelievable. The other day, last week, even a Democratic supporters came and argued that I was not born in Hong Kong and I was born in Vietnam and my parents are refugees from Vietnam. And I think this kind of propaganda exists day by day, not only in Hong Kong or China, but also around the world, because those state-owned enterprise, they might organize some of the fake account on social media platform to provide misleading information. And many times I rise above it, but until most recently, this attack become close to physical. And right now, apart from the experience being arrested for 9 times and being jailed for 3 times, in the recent weeks, I'm stalked by cars and plainclothes agents on a daily basis. And that's why I admire people, especially people engaged in the Black Lives Matter movement in the democratically elected region, and who are able to change the system by registering to vote and cast the ballot and also join the protest. I think that's the place governance by the power of people instead of by the state violence and rumors. And for a brief update of Hong Kong, I would say that Hong Kong is a place with only 7 million population. And in last summer, Hong Kong, more than 2 million people took to the street. So perhaps in the history around the world, more than million of people join a same protest might happen before. But in Hong Kong, such a small city, 2 out of 7 million people come to fight for free election and urge to elect the leader of this global city. It's really impressive. But also we continue to face a crackdown. And for example, in this city with only 7 million population, we have 10,000 people were arrested because of protest movement. And the youngest one at the age of 11 is still a primary school kid. The oldest one at the age of 84 is the elderliest. And more than 1,600 of us were prosecuted. And the maximum jail sentence might be 20 years in jail. And we also have protesters right now being detained in mainland China, having kind of secret detention. And that's what's happening in Hong Kong right now.
First of all, I just want to give a moment to let that land for those of us who are continuing to learn beyond our borders. Thank you especially for being here. It seems like you are very much in the sights of your government, which is not quite acting like your government in many ways. Patrisse, first, do you have anything you want to add to or respond to that before I try to move to another topic? I want to give you some space. No? Okay. I want to come back to the title of your book, Patrisse, because Joshua felt it and is living it. When they call you a terrorist, when your own government that's supposed to protect and serve and defend kicks in your door.
Yeah.
What does it look like? What did the actions look like? You know, being called a terrorist is one thing, but what are the consequences of your own governments turning against their people? What does that feel like? What is that?
Sure. You know, I think for us, when we were first labeled as terrorists by elected officials and appointed officials by the media, I was scared. I was scared, I was disturbed. And then I took a moment to pause and just as Josh said, realized that whenever Black people in particular stand up against the state, challenge the state, call for peace, call for justice, we are named terrorists. And I had to take a moment to think about Angela Davis, to think about Huey P. Newton, to think about Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and so many other known leaders and unknown leaders who were labeled as enemies of the state versus human beings who are trying to make their country better. I think that's the part to me that is so deeply disturbing, is that the work that Josh and I do in our countries is work that's really about paving a new way, and work that at the end of the day, if we were listened to fully, people would understand that it benefits everybody. And that is in fact the issue. What our governments are doing separately is only benefiting the few. What we're trying to do is benefit everyone. And so, you know, the label terrorist becomes this label that is very easy to stroke fear in other people. You know, people have sent me the text messages that they've received by the right and the Republican Party, and those messages largely look like Black Lives. If the Democrats win, Black Lives Matter will be destroying your home the next day. You will be losing everything that you have, and so there's this deep sense of fear that is being pushed on people, and it's our job to challenge that fear. It's our job to challenge the misinformation and disinformation that our governments and then thus so many other people start to absorb because they're fearful, because they're scared. And so, you know, our call to action right now in this space is, yes, vote. We need people to vote, but vote so you could build power. We're not just voting for voting's sake, we're voting so we can build an alternative world, so we can build the power that actually gets every single one of us free, back to your first question. I think the last thing on this label, when you're issued this label, terrorist, it actually makes way for you to be labeled a whole lot of other things as well. It's a label that dehumanizes us. It's a label that relegates us as evil, as bad. And many of you may have seen in the, the religious right is now calling us witches and practicing witchcraft, really taking us back to the Salem witch trials and the ways in which women, powerful women have been labeled as witches, and then in that label really have been demonized and at worst killed. And so this label terrorist really does open up a new doorway for so many other groups of people to deny us who we truly are, which are freedom fighters. And that to me is, really critical to engage, talk about, dissect, and then at the end of the day, like, stand up against. We all have to stand up against those labels.
Joshua, similarly to you, what do you think your government is afraid of? I am struck by the idea that you started this when you were 14 years old, and that a part of your childhood has been devoted to fighting for freedom, and here you sit in, proximity to being taken away by your police forces literally at any moment as we talk. What do you think they're afraid of, and what has it been like for you to be labeled a terrorist or a traitor or not even from Hong Kong?
When I was 14, Beijing tried to introduce the brainwashing subject to all high school students, and that's my starting point to engage in street activism. And but that policy is not only forcing students to love the country, but even loyal to the authoritarian regime. And that's the reason for me mobilize more than 100,000 people, surrounded the government headquarters, and urged the government to withdraw the evil proposal. But I think I face similar situation in Hong Kong. What I mean is being one of the freedom fighter to fight for freedom and democracy, the Hong Kong's leader and those the one who uphold the power, they also label us as facilitating local terrorism in Hong Kong, which is really terrible. And I would say that for the situation in Hong Kong, which is how about arbitrary and uncontrolled armed state officers funded by taxpayers can go when their power is unchecked and unaccountable in an undemocratic system. And in Hong Kong, we have a young lady being gang raped by riot police inside police station after file complaint with no response from the authorities. We have 16 years old high school student being fired by a live round during the protest. And that protester even didn't use force at all to join into that civil unrest. And we also realize how a protester died in the protest because being fired by rubber bullets, tear gas, and more than 30,000 canister of tear gas or rubber bullets were used in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, such a small city with only 18 districts, all of the citizens also experienced the fire of rubber bullet and tear gas inside, not outside of the government headquarters, as inside the residential area. But I would say that right now, what I'm experiencing is the time to hold the accountability of the government, no matter in the country of under authoritarian regime, just like Hong Kong, or in China, or even in democratic country. Sometimes it really matters to put pressure and to facilitate more people to concern about the level of violence, and also about how to deal with those threats and chilling effect. And in Hong Kong, we always have the practice of how riot police might storm into the house of activists 6 a.m. in the morning with the house search warrant without any notification, and arrest the protesters suddenly. And in Hong Kong right now, we have more than 100 protesters were detained inside prison already before the verdict and sentence. But even that might be the regular update what in Hong Kong. But I would say that when I dedicated myself, continue to fight for freedom, even experiencing how the criminal justice system do not favor in order to liberating voice that call for change, we still need to continue the resistance and fights, because we try to facilitate change before we see the change. And that's the reason for me continue the fight, and also hope people could aware that how to hold the accountability of the police or how to against the state violence is not only about the matter for people who live in Washington, who work in the Capitol Hill. It's matter for everyone if in different places around the world.
You're saying these words and they sound so familiar. Tear gas in the residential areas, unchecked police and state violence, rounding people up. We're living in one world right now, and it has kind of different manifestations, but you're both capturing and experiencing this together at the same time. Joshua, I want to stick with you. I want to talk about creativity and the creativity of your movement's response to everything you have described so far. The Be Water is this thing we've seen in our headlines over here. I came across something y'all did in Animal Crossing during the pandemic that it kind of blew me away. It was bigger than just a meme. Can you talk about your movement's ability to adapt, and what are some of the more creative tactics you've deployed in response?
Yeah, in the previous day when I joined those webinars, always is with scholar, with think tank, or with some of the diplomats, and more is about the U.S.-China relation and etc. And it is perhaps the first time within the previous few months I can share more about the tactics of activists, because this is a conversation between activists, and it's really my pleasure to share some of my idea. And during the outbreak of the coronavirus, it would be harder to mobilize people, take to the street. Alternatively, as you mentioned, more than 1 million Hong Kongers took to the street virtually. And there has been a virtual protest through the popular Nintendo Switch game Animal Crossing. And Hong Kong game players organized the protest, which result in Animal Crossing being banned in mainland China. Residents there are not able to buy this game anymore, and it just facilitates more of the freedom fighters of Hong Kong use this platform to share our idea. And apart from Animal Crossing, I think how my observe of Black Lives Matter, Be Water in Hong Kong, and also what happened in Thailand and Belarus shares some similar characters. What I mean is the advanced use of technology and smartphone app, and the world is really surprised to see how protesters in Hong Kong are flexibly using communication tools like Telegram chat and channels, and the communication is well protected and encrypted and would not easily disclose identities. Also, sharing real-time information of the front line of the protest zone would help fill the information gap on the ground. Protesters can adjust the strategy, and protesting destination quickly can find an easier path to facilitate our protest. Even a greater number of police officers are deployed. And certainly we face challenges in light of increasing infiltration of the police force, and with those communication channels face more difficulties. But overall speaking, technology has helped social movement develop a more dynamic and diversified manner, and it made people more connected than even before. And after explaining Animal Crossing and about Telegram, I think Twitter is really important. Hong Kong is a quite special society. Before 3 years ago, none of the Hong Kongers might use Twitter, and it is really not a popular platform, no matter for millennials, Gen X, or for young adults. And the mobilization at Twitter provide a significant to the movement in Hong Kong. And I would say that we even develop a kind of daily assignment for Hong Kong protesters and democratic supporters to participate on this frontier. Each day on the Telegram channel, you can receive a list of essential tweets to comment or retweet in order to boost protest-related tweets into hot topic. And a very popular hashtag in Hong Kong recently is hashtag Save 12 Hong Kong Youths, as recently 12 activists were seized by Chinese Coastal Guard when fleeing Taiwan for political refugee. No one knows when they will be released. And this online mobilization is enormous and also enough to exert considerable discursive power against the state propaganda. And when a simple click of your smartphone is also a contribution to the movement, it also gives such empowerment to the mass public who might not be able to serve on the forefront of the escalating of protests. So I would say that Telegram, Twitter, Animal Crossing, those also imply the decentralization of protest movement. Apart from the civil unrest or the clash on the street, how we could facilitate more people might take different role to against the state violence and to also facilitate the principle of be water, which is really important.
Patrisse, I want to stick on this creativity beat for a minute with you. Joshua talks about the use of decentralizing technology tools, trying to reclaim the narrative and shift what's even trending on a platform like Twitter to counter what the media may be telling as a different story. What's your version of this, your experience with a creative response to resistance by the state?
I'm an artist as well as an organizer and activist, and art has always been really central to my work. I think we've seen Black artists in particular use art as a way to communicate what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, and what they're envisioning for the future of Black people. I think a lot about Amir Baraka. I think a lot about the work of David Hammonds. And I think about Alison Saar, the image right behind me, and her mother, Betty Saar. Black movements, the Black arts movement has always been such a critical force inside of our organizing practice. I think in this current iteration, anywhere from young Black TikTok users and the use of and creativity of like getting a new kind of conversation going through a new medium. There's a big reason why. There's just a big reason why Trump doesn't want folks to be using TikTok because it's been an effective creative tool. I also want to just flag that there's a troll in the chat, BFD, who's a troll, so we should take him out the chat for folks who are managing the Zoom. And then I just want to talk about how, thank you, Pen America, our troll has been removed. I think that art and creativity become also a central theme on how we feel more connected. I did a piece called Fuck White Supremacy, Let's Get Free. And it was in response to the first visuals that we started to get from babies being caged at the border, the US-Mexico border. And I just remember the sheer hopelessness I felt. And I was like, you know what? Let's figure out how we still stay connected. This is pre-pandemic. We still stay connected to each other because part of the role of white supremacy is to disconnect us, is to keep us isolated and scared. And so when we come together, get our endorphins moving through dance, something else happens, which is us being able to imagine more freely. So we did the electric slide. There's 200 of us that showed up to an art gallery parking lot, and we did the electric slide for 2 hours, and had this amazing DJ. And I promise you, by the end of that, I thought that people would, you know, it was a performance piece, so I thought that people were going to show up and, you know, maybe do the electric slide a little bit with me, and then sit down and go home, and like maybe, you know, about 15 people did that, but majority of those folks did the electric slide for 2 hours. And it just showed me how much people needed something different, needed to feel something different. So creativity is so critical in the work of organizers and activists.
I want you to each of you to think about what you want to ask each other. I have one more thing for you, Josh, though. I get this sense from you that you are very in this work. You know, you've devoted half of your life to this, and of your conscious years, a majority of them. And you're very good at telling us what's going on in Hong Kong right now. I'd love to know, how you feel day to day with all of this. You described a series of pressures which most of us cannot really identify with. How do you handle that pressure, and why do you do what you do? Why do you keep doing what you're doing?
The threats can't defeat me, make me even stronger determination. And compared to lots of my teammates and friends were already physically locked up in prison of Hong Kong and need to spend time in prison for 6 years or 10 years, or having kind of secret detention in mainland China of kind of black jail, the price I pay is just a small piece of cake. And I would say that I wish devoted whatever efforts I can to define this new round of oppression. Not only that actions speak louder than words, but action as a solution to an era in crisis is much need to cause change. And I'm confident that change will come since people have been awakened by repressive oppressor worldwide, be it politically, socially, racially, economically, and etc. And the oppressor in the system may round up journalists and also threatening online speeches, throw dissidents into prison, also with different kind of fees and rumor exists. But at least they can't force the awakened people black to be silenced. And I think that's what I believe. And I would say that in Hong Kong, such a world city, it seems to be well developed, but it's the place that we stand in the forefront to confront the largest authoritarian regime, which means Beijing around the world. And we also hope people could know that this kind of fake news, misleading information, propaganda, or the state machine that facilitates state violence is not only affecting Hong Kong, and it might even export to Asia, to Europe, or even to the Western world. And that's why the situation in Hong Kong might be mattered to the world. And also with my book on free speech, why I published this book, part of the reason is about the record of my diary in prison. Another reason is I hope one day everyone around the world, no matter they live in Hong Kong or they live in US, everyone would not have unfree speech anymore. And when the day comes, I can write a book of free speech. Yeah.
What do you want to say to each other or ask each other?
I think in the previous journey, state violence or police brutality might be experienced by a lot of activists. And I wonder when to deal with those pressure, especially we always say that engage in social movement, there's a lot of sacrifice in private life. And as a youngster, without concrete economic or family burden, especially I still in the final year in my university studying. So how to get a balance between family and the the personal engagement in politics? I think that's the question that everyone would love to know, and everyone is trying their best to balance it. Yeah.
Yeah, such a great question, Joshua. And you know, I've been doing activism since I was 16 years old. So just 2 years. I was 2 years older than you when I started my work, and now I'm 37 years old. And this question you're asking me is actually a question I've asked myself since I was 16 years old. And I'm not going to say I have all the answers, because I don't, but I will say this. The work of ending systems and rebuilding new systems is lifelong work, and it'll always be here. It is so important, especially as you are in the throes of your movement at home, that you find time for joy, that you find time for pleasure, that you find time for your community and your family and your friends. It is so critical that you have that time. And I'll tell you this, you know, 7 years ago when we started Black Lives Matter, I didn't make a lot of time for those things. I was in it, you know, I was in Ferguson, I was here in LA, I was traveling the world. And while I was inspiring a lot of people, I was suffering. I was super depressed. I was super anxious. I wasn't taking care of myself, my health, and I wasn't taking care of my friendships and my family relationships, and those suffered greatly. And so, and this iteration of this movement, you know, a few years later, and as the world is galvanized behind Black Lives Matter, I've said no more often than yes. I've made sure to, you know, make sure that I'm off call so I can put my 4-year-old to bed. I've made sure to stay connected to my family and community, because that's who I'm fighting for. At the end of the day, I'm fighting for the people that I love around me, and I want them to feel that love too. And so as much as that we can give ourselves to the movement, I used to tell people, and it's still true, that the movement is my primary partner. It's my first love. It's who I'm married to. And that often meant that I didn't have a lot of room and space for other people and other things, but I've really tried to balance that these days. And so you're 24 and you have time to really construct a new way of being. And that may feel impossible. It may feel like, how is that possible to do that given how much we have to do? But I promise you, the work of building community is also the work of the revolution. Did you want to say anything to that, Baratunde, before I ask my question? So Josh, I just want to thank you so much for your commitment to your people, but I see your commitment to your people as your commitment to all of us, to the whole of humanity. I just feel so overjoyed and grateful to be in communication with you, and really hope that we could continue to build our relationship as you continue to do your work and I continue to do my work. I'm curious about what you see in 10 years from now, what you want your country to feel like, what you want to be like in your country. What do you want to see from it? What feels most important to you and your colleagues and your comrades? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I love your sharing about building community is also related to facilitating the protest and the revolution, or etc. Always people might think there's a contradiction between building a community and facilitating the protest on street, but always I think that there's not having any kind of conflict between them, because the community is really the base to strengthen our capacity and solidarity to continue in this long-term battle. And with your sharing, I guess maybe 10 years later, I may also face the similar situation about how to balance between the family and also about the activism work. And I would say that with my previous almost 10 years journey since 2011, the first year that I found my own activist group, I wish Hong Kong can be a place that freely allow people to determine the future, instead of the future is being dominated by the upper class elite, red capital tycoons, or the one who uphold the power and and never respect on the voice of people. And because I think in the previous around half hour we talked a lot of police brutality and etc. I would say that the violence or the police violence are seen not only in France but also entrenched in our society. And the system use of violence by the police force is also creating many other social problems, not just in the protest scene. No matter beating up homeless people, mishandling domestic violence, and sexual violence cases. And I think those situations should be more recognized, and it's more about how we can provide a better future for the next generation. Compared to what I experiencing in high school since last summer, one of the differences is about how the millennials and Gen X, they are even braver than me, ready to pay the price and dedicated to the movement. And as the one born a year before the transfer of sovereignty of Hong Kong in 1996, I be described in Hong Kong as one of the senior young activists, which means that yeah, I'm not belongs to the Gen X or millennials, but I'm still being recognized as young activists. But I seems that engaged in politics for a while already, and I just wish to let more people to care about the state violence and the police brutality. And no matter I feel outstring learning about the development of the Taylor case today, and also I think how what I observed is since last summer till now, instead of defunding police force like what was done in New York, officers in Hong Kong has a rising salary, more subsidies, and extended retirement age. It seems that Hong Kong, which means my hometown, already transformed it to be another police state. And even it's a long-term fight to reform the police system, but I think that's the first step to make any possibility happen for the political system change to be more fair in the future. And when heard about you guys talk about cast the ballots to vote, I wish one day we could also have our vote to elect our administration. And it's some of my idea. And sorry to be off topic, but I wish how Hong Kong or my commitment can inspire more people around the world to know that every small step can really make a great change in the long-term fight.
Every small step can make a great change in the long-term fight. Very true. I love these echoes, and I really like you two in direct dialogue. There's an indirect dialogue I think I've been picking up on that I'd like to draw out of both of you. Joshua, you've spoken a lot about communist/authoritarian rule and people not being able to determine their own futures, and that's what you're fighting against. Patrisse, you've talked about white supremacy as this form I'm interpreting of authoritarianism, which denies us access to each other, which denies us full freedom. Do either of you see more of a connection or bridge between those forces resisting your struggles for freedom, the authoritarian and hyper-communist forces of a big state like China, the more diffuse but no less powerful force of white supremacy here in the United States?
I don't know if I understand your question.
That's fair. And maybe it doesn't make sense, but it's possible. It's possible. I use a lot of words, but maybe it didn't make sense. I'm looking to find a thread between power,
yeah,
those who are wielding it, and denying others the ability to exercise it. And
sure.
each of you have named a different opponent in your struggles.
Yes.
Joshua has named authoritarianism and the largest authoritarian regime in the world.
Right.
And you have named, Patrisse, white supremacy, which is not a regime, but it is a powerful worldview and way of thinking that affects a lot. And I wanted to offer a possible link for you two to explore between those two opponents.
Yeah, I would like to share some of my idea on this issue, because calling for accountability to police brutality was established among the 5 demands of Hong Kong people since last year. And I think the rationale between what's happening for the Taylor case or in Hong Kong is plain and simple. People are losing faith in the criminal justice system if it's continue to sympathize the powerful oppressor and neglect of those systematic abuse. I think that's happening around the world, and not only in Hong Kong, and also not only in United States. So the fight towards equitable justice is so long a battle we can't avoid, and no one wants to see the nation torn and shattered. But sadly, the systematic injustice divide them and us, and fill our place with frustration and disgrace. And victims deserve better, and we deserve better. And I think justice is the only way to bring peace to the communities. And even no matter for the Black Lives Matter or the Be Water movement in Hong Kong might have different historical path and a cultural background, or even the for the racial issue in United States, I think the fight and journey is far more long than the democracy movement in Hong Kong just exists for 3 decades, and that's all. But I think even have different kind of political and cultural context, how to share some of the similarity and also have the more mutual understanding about the universal value that all we believe in is more matter. And also let people to know that if, of course, for people in Hong Kong, we wish one day we could elect our government and people could be the master of their own house. But if people hope to be the master of their own house, having a vote to cast the ballots is only the first step. And later on, how to push forward equality, social justice, and those progressive values that we cherish is still a long-term fight.
Yeah, ditto on that, Josh. And I also think that, you know, something that we're not talking about is patriarchy and the role that patriarchy plays in really shaping authoritarian systems. And I think that it's really important that we don't undermine the role of patriarchy and the culture of patriarchy that really exists in so many of our societies across the world. This idea that the iron fist is the way that you, you know, promote a culture or socialize a culture, that you know, the role of punishment and a punitive way of being is the way of being towards human beings or certain human beings. And so I think a lot about patriarchy when I'm thinking about the conversation that we're having right now when it comes to power. And, you know, power isn't inherently bad. It's how we use power and how we relate to power. Every one of us have power. We do. The people clearly have power. We're seeing it. And so that kind of power is so important and necessary. It's the power that is abused. It's the power that is used against human beings so that they can't be free, so that they're restricted, so we're unable to be able to get our needs met. A power that manipulates populations, that power that is unable to see people for who they fully are. You know, I think that's the power that we're talking about in our countries and those structures. Sometimes as activists and organizers, we, you know, relate to power in really fearful ways. We're like, we don't want to have power because we don't want to be like the state. I actually really want to challenge that because power is necessary. I want us to have power. I want us to build power, but I want us to build power in a way that is about mutuality and reciprocity. I want us to build power that really looks at connectivity and our ability to be human beings together, not power that creates suffering and oppression. And I think we need to be able to differentiate those kinds of, the different kinds of power and what they're needed for and what they're used for, how they're used against us.
Thank you. We have all of a sudden people flooded with questions as we're just running out of time. I'm going to use my moderator privilege and pick one, which I think speaks to both of you. I will respectfully ask each of you to try to keep it short, and I'll do the same by stopping talking right now. Here's the question from Cynthia P. Many people, including myself, see the systemic and understand the problems, but we do not know where to start. Where would you recommend that we start? I don't believe that physical protest is the only way for all people to participate in our fight for the future.
I would say that apart from dedicating to your activism at home, do take time and put more attention to the activists around the world, in Hong Kong, in Belarus, Thailand, and etc. And while we might differ a bit our demands or the complicated power relationship among different actors, I believe that knowing about the world is also a significant empowerment to your activism when you face, when sometimes you may feel a bit powerless or a bit defeated or tired during the struggle. And there are always things to learn from each other. And for example, in Hong Kong, we are really under threat. And I just remember one of the guests, one of the audience asked the question about are me afraid of the safety on this call? And I also have to emphasize a bit about what's happening recently, because people might not have heard about the draconian national security law that targeted democratic activists like myself just recently implemented on July 1st of this year. And it's a repressive tool against protesters and destroy the criminal justice system in Hong Kong. And under the pretext of national security, the law is used to target the collusion with foreign force. However, Beijing did not define what is collusion, but it just results in massive discretionary power to punish activists and cut off Hong Kong from international society and their crucial support on the other. And with the arbitrary definition of the collusion with foreign force, even joining this conversation by also enhancing my risk to arrested with the national security law. And this law also gives far-reaching power to the exclusive to control whom to prosecute it and whom to judge the cases. And I think that's what I am facing. But refer to the question, I just wish people could know that if you sometimes face the difficulties of how could I contribute to the civil society in my hometown, I think just look towards the activism around the world. It might sometimes impress and inspire you.
You have anything to add on where people can start, Patrisse, before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, you can start with what's happening right now inside the US. There are so many ways that you can be involved. I always tell people, join something. Social media may feel like that is the place in which the revolution happens, but I promise it doesn't. And so join an organization, join a collective. If it doesn't exist, start it. That's what many of us have done. But I'll say that follow what you feel most passionate and most excited about. What keeps you up at night? What makes you want to, what do you want to change in our society? That may be, voter suppression, it may be police terror, it may be an end to the criminal legal system, it may be climate justice, whatever it is, join that movement and show up for it and for yourself. And you can, there's so many organizations out there that are doing incredible work. And we can, plug you into them. But I think that's so important to me.
You both are very important to me and to all of us. You've given a lot. I will ask and offer you the chance to give one more thing, which is any closing thought, like a minute, something that you wanted to get to or something you're inspired to share right now before I hand the mic back over to Clarice.
That was my closing thought.
That was a great one. Joshua?
Yeah. The situation in Hong Kong might be a bit unique, and I hope to, through this sharing, to let more people around the world to know that it's still necessary to put more attention to the fights around the world. Just like I mentioned in the past about what happened in Belarus, in Thailand, Black Lives Matter, and etc. Because the fight of course, more is about how the domestic system reform in our hometown, but more at the same time is about the universal value that we all cherish. In the previous day, when we talk about international community or globalization, it might be more about world leaders, collaboration, trade negotiation, how to have more geopolitical cooperation, those high-level political issues. But I think in the new era, when we have more street activism and in the digital age, we can facilitate more collaboration and more of the synergy, and let those upper class and the one who hold the power to realize that they should listen to the voice of the street activism. And even we might not be the one who are being elected, or we might not be the one who work in the capital, but we still have our uniqueness to contribute lots to our protest movement. And I think that's the reason for us to join the fight.
Join the fight, indeed. There's something, Patrisse, you said that power isn't inherently bad. It's how we use power, it's how we relate to power. And thank you for that. Thank you, Joshua. I'm Baratunde, and it's been an honor to do this. I'm gonna hand it over back to Clarice so we can try to keep this time and let Clarice keep that family together.
Yeah, and actually, no, thank you. I mean, first off, thank you, Baratunde, for, you know, just leading this conversation. Thank you, Patrisse, and thank you, Joshua, for your generosity of time and what you shared with us. I think it's so precious, and I can't wait to share it with more people. And I know that Baratunde is going to share it with more people with his podcast. And so I just want to say a big thank you. I'm thinking about all the people who are protesting right now, tonight in the street. I'm definitely thinking about Joshua and the work that you do and what is you're going to face, you know, day after day in the coming weeks. So, you know, let's continue to be together. It was wonderful to create that space virtually tonight. And there's so much inspiration that I'm taking away from this event. And I want to thank everybody for joining us in that kind of space of solidarity and global solidarity, actually. So thank you again, and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.